Hello, everyone. It's Valeria Giffen with the JLA, and today we are joined by a new guest who his article was published to the special issue on AI. So this is very exciting. You're our first interview for the special issue. I want to welcome Tariq Adely. So thank you so much for agreeing to take part in this interview and summarizing
Of
your
course.
article. Before we get into it, though, would you be able to just give us a brief introduction of who you are, where you're at, and what kinds of research you enjoy doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm a PhD candidate in anthropology at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Broadly speaking, my research kind of looks at the interconnections of kind of three areas, looking at technology, language, and labor. Most of my work has focused on Arabic-speaking contexts, particularly Jordan. So in the past, for example, I've researched literary production in Amman and kind of the communicative practices through which literary texts circulate in the city. And I'm currently working on my dissertation, which analyzes how workers in Amman's IT sector kind of conceptualize and kind of continually reinvent Arabic through the process of making AI language models. And so, this article in JLA is kind of from this broader project. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yes, and this is very, relevant to our current day. I feel like AI is more and more in the conversation, even in like everyday context. So, without further ado, would you be able to give us a brief summary for a public audience about your article that you had published to the JLA?
Yeah, absolutely. So the article focuses in particular on engineers in the IT sector in Amman, Jordan. And the article kind of traces how they think about their work with artificial intelligence technology, particularly large language models, in relation to the Arabic language. So in this article, what I'm kind of suggesting is that looking at how engineers articulate the relationship between their work, AI and Arabic, kind of gives us a view into broader tensions and contradictions in the transnational AI industry. And so this is kind of why I begin this article with a glimpse at Sam Altman's visit to Amman in 2023 to sort of draw out some of these contradictions. So, thinking about perhaps AI in the broad scheme of things, it's often described as this radical break from the past that's going to usher in uh, kind of an alternate future. But as a technology, an AI model functions through training on these massive stores of data from the past. Thinking about AI, we also constantly hear discourses about it being this global technology, but it can only be global through so much kind of linguistic expertise and kind of situated local contexts. So that sort of allow its circulation across, linguistic and cultural landscapes. And then, kind of as a corollary to that, these large AI firms like OpenAI, um, they depend upon these local workers with linguistic and cultural expertise, and yet these workers are systematically invisibilized. They're marginalized, kind of within the sort of corporate structures of the AI industry, often relying on regimes of outsourced labor. So this is kind of a very broad backdrop for what I discuss in the article, um, where I kind of posit that the global production of AI models, from the vantage point of Amman Jordan, is kind of predicated on this idea of, there are those who can build these universal unmarked models, and those people are usually imagined to be in Silicon Valley. And for those workers in Amman's IT sector, they are merely doing this work of adapting or localizing these models. And so, kind of in response to these contradictions, these tensions, these inequities, I sort of look at how engineers try to make sense, but also assert the value of their labor within the realm of sort of language and their conceptions of language. So in the article, I sketch out kind of three broad stances, and I'll particularly focus on the third one. But the first one is what I call frozen Arabic, which is this idea that Arabic is inherently an outdated or antiquated language, and it's therefore not compatible with contemporary technologies. And so this kind of language ideology very much resonates with kind of colonial discourses in the Arabic speaking world about Arabic as traditional as opposed to modern, as sort of unable to handle kind of the technological demands of modernity. I then kind of moved to this idea of the side effect, which is kind of articulated by a group of engineers who say, absolutely not. There's nothing inherently kind of backwards or outdated about Arabic. This is about kind of these broader power structures that kind of determine which languages get resources, which languages get prioritized in domains like AI and kind of um, technological development more broadly. Um, and so, this stance kind of entails uh, kind of a resignation to the fact that, Arabic, in comparison to English, for example, is never going to be at the same level because of these power differentials. But English is going to advance, and we might kind of reap these secondary benefits of technological progress with Arabic. And so this kind of brings me to this third perspective, which is really where I place a lot of focus in the article. And it's this idea that I talk about broadly as language agnosticism. And the idea here, which I don't want to characterize as sort of uh, a broadly held view, but it was certainly communicated by kind of a cohort of engineers with whom I carried out research. And the idea here is that, AI language models have advanced to such a degree that they are no longer relying on language. They are training as models. They're training on digits. They're training on these vectors in kind of multidimensional space. And I won't go too much into the technical details, but a lot of this idea of language agnosticism kind of references the sort of technological architectures that make AI possible. Here I'm specifically thinking about word embeddings. And so I kind of situate language agnosticism within these inequities that I had sketched out earlier that really structure what the transnational AI industry looks like. Which is to say that sort of by laying claim, or perhaps more accurately, by claiming that AI models are not focusing on language, but are in fact training on numbers and digits, it kind of renders the question of Arabic a moot point, which is to say, it doesn't matter if Arabic is, frozen in time or, modern. It doesn't matter if it's, logical or illogical, antiquated or contemporary. At the end of the day, these models are just sort of looking at digits and vectors. And so this, claim, which I kind of characterize as a semiotic ideology, a kind of set of beliefs or discourses about not just language, but how representation works, um, kind of allows the engineers who are proponents of it to sort of try and dissolve this binary between universal model builders and localizers. Because in this kind of conception of language and AI, AI isn't really dependent upon language. So they're not Arabic AI workers. They are kind of, AI workers, full stop. And then so that is kind of the crux of the argument. But for the remainder of the article, I really kind of go into how this idea of language agnosticism kind of gets maintained and reproduced, both in everyday kind of conversations in the IT sector, but also in kind of labor practices and kind of other communicative interactions. Um, which is to say that, while, these engineers make a claim about AI models not depending on language, to say something like that requires one to kind of invisibilize the sort of huge number of linguistic experts who are employed within a company producing a model. Folks like data labelers, like linguists, lexicographers who create dictionaries, et cetera, et cetera. And so, kind of the latter half of the article kind of details what I think about as these demarcation practices, which is to say, engineers who kind of propose this idea of language agnosticism need to, not always invisibilize, but to say these people who are, preparing the training data on which, AI models train, um, that's sort of not within the domain of AI work. Um, and so it's kind of through this sidelining, but also to some extent invisibilization, excuse me, of linguistic labor, that this idea of language agnosticism um, can kind of be reinscribed and reproduced. Um, but I guess, as kind of a final thought, just to wrap up, in a lot of ways, my research focuses specifically on Amman, Jordan, because of its trajectory within both the regional, but also a kind of global political economy of AI. Which is to say, Jordan has sort of capitalized on this idea that it is kind of a content powerhouse, often through references to statistics about, Jordan, which is a rather small country of, somewhere between 12 and 14 million people producing, the majority of Arabic content on the internet, though there is quite a bit of skepticism about these statistics. And so, Jordan has kind of tried to leverage this reputation to position itself as kind of uniquely capable of um, providing kind of export-oriented outsourced labor to create Arabic AI. And in some ways, this puts these engineers in kind of a very tenuous position. Because on the one hand, they want to sort of lay claim to this identity of, I am an AI engineer and part of this kind of global class of kind of tech innovators. And, to do so, they kind of try to shy away from associations with Arabic and localization. But at the same time, in doing so, they kind of risk kind of losing out on, what might be called in kind of tech speak, their value added. Because it's in a lot of ways their kind of positioning in Jordan that sort of makes them these competitive kind of applicants for tech jobs, kind of capitalizing on Jordan's reputation as this kind of hub for Arabic and technology.
Thank you so much. That was a great summary and I was like drawing out what I had read in the article from what you were saying, and so I thought it was really nicely explained the sort of sequence of it all. Um, I'm really curious about these ideologies that you talked about and fleshed out. I know you focus a lot on like the semiotic component. I was just curious because I know this all draws from like ethnographic work that you conducted. Um,
Mhm.
I was curious to hear, it's two questions I have. One of them is, did anybody hold like multiple of these ideologies, or did you notice consistently that it was like one of these at a time? And my other question that I had, I'm trying to remember. So we'll start with the first question.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for this question. And it's a wonderful observation because that is certainly the case. I think for the sake of sort of argument and analysis, it's easy to sort of sketch these out. But, there was definitely some kind of, there was definitely overlap, within the same individuals. And, people take up ideological stances kind of strategically and sort of kind of differently in relation to different scenarios and communicative contexts. So I remember one engineer with whom I spoke had talked about how it was quite easy to kind of make a name for oneself by taking uh, kind of tools for natural language processing. So kind of this umbrella term for processes related to preparing data for AI model training. And so he had said, it's quite easy to just sort of take what's been done in English and try and reproduce that in Arabic, because Arabic has been kind of historically under-resourced and kind of deprioritized in this field. And in that sense, his explanation kind of resonates with this idea of the side effect. Is this idea of you know Arabic has not really been the focus of attention. It's under-resourced, and so it's easy enough to just sort of kind of benefit from what's already been done in English. But at the same time, later in the same conversation, he says, "Well, it's easy enough to kind of make these English NLP tools into kind of Arabic versions because and he's actually the one who says the phrase language agnostic. He says it's quite easy because you just show it data, show it these numbers, and it'll learn. It doesn't really matter what language you're showing it. And then, of course, I think in the conclusion, I talk about how um, he kind of informs me that he is working on a project related to, a Chinese language model.
Oh, yes,
Um,
I
and,
remember this.
and he says, yeah, I mean, at this stage, you know, you don't really need any kind of linguistic expertise to really do this sort of work because it's about numbers, it's about these vectors, these sort of word embedding architectures, uh, and so this is in the article what I talk about is as kind of this post language future that language agnosticism is kind of imagining in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really like, that's that last part where you're focusing on the language agnosticism. It's like, it's not just reproduced in them like expressing these ideologies, but the fact that like even within the offices, like the linguists are separated from the engineers. It's very interesting to think of like even spatially, they are not located in the same place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what I find so intriguing about this is how these engineers, in response to the kind of labor divisions at sort of a transnational level between kind of the universal and the local, are kind of reproducing the same dynamics at sort of a different scale by saying, within this office, I'm the AI person. And of course, it's not their decision. This is also,
Right.
corporate policy and whatnot. But this division between the people who work on the technology and the people who work on the Arabic kind of even gets reproduced at this very kind of micro level.
Yeah, no, that's it's really interesting. Well, I thank you so much for taking part of this interview. I won't spoil too much more about the article so people can check it out, but thank you so much for your summary and your time. Before we conclude the interview, if anybody were watching this or reading your article and they wanted to know more and ask you a question, is there any way they could reach out to you, maybe an email or anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd welcome any thoughts and questions. And I can be reached at Tariq, Tariq underscore Adely, Adely at gwU.edu.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Tariq.
Thank you.